Hello fanatics, welcome or welcome back to Diamond Painting Fanatics. I am Cindy and it's time for Spooky Flings. I'm so excited. I'm doing this episode early because on October 31st I will be doing the winter episode, so I thought I would kick off, and I know we're early, but we are heading into Halloween, so I thought we could do a little dive into history and find out all about Halloween. So grab your Spooky Fling canvas, come join me as we dive into history, which is not my strongest suit. Halloween is a holiday celebrated each year on October 31st. The tradition originated with the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, when people would light bonfires and wear costumes to ward off ghosts. In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III designated November the 1st as a time to honour All Saints. Soon, All Saints' Day incorporated some of the traditions of Samhain. The evening before was known as All Hallows' Eve and later Halloween. Over time, Halloween evolved into a day of activities like trick-or-treating, carving jack-o'-lanterns, festive gatherings, donning costumes, and eating treats. Halloween's origins date back to the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. I hope I'm saying that right. The Celts, who lived 2,000 years ago, mostly in the area that is now Ireland. The United Kingdom and northern France celebrated their New Year on November the 1st. This day marked the end of summer and the harvest, and the beginning of the dark, cold winter, a time of year that was often associated with human death. How lovely. Celts believed that on the night before the new year, the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead became blurred. On the night of October 31st, they celebrated Samhain, when it was believed that the ghosts of the dead returned to Earth. In addition to causing trouble and damaging crops, Celts thought that the presence of other worldly spirits made it easier for the Druids or Celtic priests to make predictions about the future. For a people entirely dependent on the volatile natural world, these prophecies were an important source of comfort during the long, dark winter. To commemorate the event, Druids built huge sacred bonfires where people gathered to burn crops and animals as sacrifices to the Celtic deities. That's not very nice. During the celebration, the Celts wore costumes typically consisting of animal heads and skins, and attempted to tell each other's fortunes. When the celebration was over, they relit their hearth fires, which they had extinguished earlier that evening, from the sacred bonfire to help protect them during the coming winter. By 43 AD, the Roman Empire had conquered the majority of the Celtic territory. In the course of the 400 years that they ruled the Celtic lands, 2 festivals of Roman origin were combined with the tradition of the Celtic celebration of Samhain. The first was Feralia, a day in late October when the Romans traditionally commemorated the passing of the dead. The second was a day to honour Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruit and trees. The symbol of Pomona is the apple, and the incorporation of this celebration into Samhain probably explains the tradition of bobbing for apples that is practiced on Halloween. All Saints' Day. On May the 13th, 609 AD, Pope Boniface predicted the Pantheon in Rome in honour of all Christian martyrs, and the Catholic feast for All Martyrs' Day was established in the Western Church. Pope Gregory III later expanded the festival to include all saints as well as all martyrs, and moved the observance from May 31st to November the 1st. I don't know how you can for example, my birthday is on the 10th of January. I can't suddenly just move it to July 22nd. I don't know how you just move holidays like that, but that's what happened. By the 9th century, the influence of Christianity had spread into Celtic lands, where it gradually blended with and supplanted older Celtic rites. In 1000 AD, the Church made November 2nd All Souls' Day, a day to honour the dead. It's widely believed today that the Church was attempting to replace the Celtic Festival of the Dead with a related Church-sanctioned holiday. All Souls' Day was celebrated similarly to Samhain, with big bonfires, parades, and dressing up in costumes as saints, angels, and devils. The All Saints' Day celebration was also called All Hallows, and the night before it, the traditional night of Samhain in the Celtic religion, began to be called All Hallows' Eve, and eventually Halloween. As the beliefs and customs of different European ethnic groups and the American Indians meshed, a distinctly American version of Halloween began to emerge. The first celebration included, quote, play parties, which were public events held to celebrate the harvest. Neighbours would share stories of the dead, tell each other's fortunes, dance and sing. Colonial Halloween festivities also featured the telling of ghost stories and mischief making of all kinds. By the middle of the 19th century, annual autumn festivities were common, but Halloween was not yet celebrated everywhere in the country. In the second half of the 19th century, America was flooded with new immigrants. These new immigrants, especially the millions of Irish fleeing from the Irish potato famine, helped to popularise the celebration of Halloween nationally. Interesting, isn't it? The history of trick-or-treating. Borrowing from European traditions, Americans began to dress up in costumes and go house to house asking for food or money, a practice that eventually became today's trick-or-treat tradition. Young women believed that on Halloween they could divine the name or appearance of their future husband by doing tricks with yarn, apple parings, or mirrors. In the late 1800s, there was a move in America to mould Halloween into a holiday more about community and neighbourly get-togethers than about ghosts, pranks, and witchcraft. At the turn of the century, Halloween parties for both children and adults became the most common way to celebrate the day. Parties focused on games, foods of the season, and festive costumes. Parents were encouraged by newspapers and community leaders to take anything, quote, frightening or grotesque out of Halloween celebrations. Because of these efforts, Halloween lost most of its superstitious and religious overtones by the beginning of the 20th century. By the 1920s and 1930s, Halloween had become a community-centred holiday with parades and town-wide Halloween parties as the featured entertainment. Despite the best efforts of many schools and communities, vandalism began to plague some celebrations in many communities during this time. By the 1950s, town leaders had successfully limited vandalism, and Halloween had evolved into a holiday directed mainly at the young. Due to the high numbers of young children during the 50s baby boom, parties moved from town civic centres into the classroom or home, where they could be more easily accommodated. Between 1920 and 1950, the centuries-old practice of trick-or-treating was also revived. Trick-or-treating was a relatively inexpensive way for an entire community to share the Halloween celebration. In theory, families could also prevent tricks being played on them by providing the neighbourhood children with small treats. Thus, a new American tradition was born, and it continued to grow. Today, Americans spend an estimated $6 billion annually on Halloween, making it the country's largest second commercial holiday after Christmas. Speaking of commercial success, scary Halloween movies have a long history of being box office hits. Classic Halloween movies include the Halloween franchise, based on the 1978 original film directed by John Carpenter and Donald Pleasence, Nick Castle, Jamie Lee Curtis, and Tony Moran. In Halloween, a young boy named Michael Myers murders his 17-year-old sister and is committed to jail, only to escape as a teen on Halloween night and seek out his old home and a new target. A direct sequel to the original Halloween was released in 2018, starring Jamie Lee Curtis and Nick Castle. A sequel to that, Halloween Kills, the 12th film in the Halloween franchise overall, was released in 2021. Considered a classic horror film down to its spooky soundtrack, Halloween inspired other iconic quote, slasher films like Scream, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Friday the 13th. More family-friendly Halloween movies include Hocus Pocus, The Nightmare Before Christmas, Beetlejuice, and It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. I love Beetlejuice. Apparently, side note, Johnny Depp is playing a character in the second one. That'd be interesting. All Souls Day and Soul Cakes. The American Halloween tradition of trick-or-treating probably dates back to the early All Souls Day parades in England. During the festivities, poor citizens would beg for food and families would give them pastries called soul cakes in return for their promise to pray for the family's dead relatives. Distribution of soul cakes was encouraged by the church as a way to replace the ancient practice of leaving food and wine for roaming spirits. The practice, I can just imagine all the spirits. I am spiritual and I do believe that there are spirits, but I don't see them drinking wine and stuff. Because if they did that, they would help with housework and diamond painting, wouldn't they? Anyway, the practice, which was referred to as, quote, going a-souling, end quote, was eventually taken up by children who would visit the houses in their neighbourhood and be given ale, food and money. The tradition of dressing in costume for Halloween has both European and Celtic roots. Hundreds of years ago, winter was an uncertain and frightening time. Food supplies often ran low, and for the many people afraid of the dark, the short holidays of the winter were full of constant worry. On Halloween, when it was believed that ghosts came back to the earthly world, people thought that they would encounter ghosts if they left their homes. Side note, they visit your homes. To avoid being recognised by these ghosts, people would wear masks and they left their homes after dark so that the ghosts would mistake them for fellow spirits. On Halloween, to keep ghosts away from their houses, people would place bowls of food outside their home to appease the ghosts and prevent them from attempting to enter. I'm not quite sure. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in spirits, but there's a big difference between the two. I'm not sure they would get distracted by food because how would they eat it? Anyway, Halloween has always been a holiday filled with mystery, magic and superstition. It began as a Celtic end-of-summer festival during which people felt especially close to deceased relatives and friends. For these friendly spirits, they set places at the dinner table, left treats on doorsteps and along the side of the road, and lit candles to help loved ones find their way back to the spirit world. Side note, they were scared a minute ago, so they left food outside, and now they're setting places at the table. Today's Halloween ghosts are often depicted as more fearsome and malevolent, and our customs and superstitions were scarier too. We avoid crossing paths with black cats, afraid that they might bring us bad luck. This idea has its roots in the Middle Ages, when many people believed that witches avoided detection by turning themselves into black cats. Now that I did not know. We try not to walk under ladders for the same reason. This superstition may have come from the ancient Egyptians who believed that triangles were sacred. It also may have something to do with the fact that walking under a leaning ladder tends to be fairly unsafe. And around Halloween especially, we try to avoid breaking mirrors. I don't know about you, but I try to avoid them all year. Stepping on cracks in the road or spilling salt. I've just realised I'm very superstitious. But what about the Halloween traditions and beliefs that today's trick-or-treaters have forgotten all about? Many of these obsolete rituals focused on the future instead of the past, and the living instead of the dead. In particular, many had to do with helping young women identify their future husbands and reassuring them that they would someday, with luck, by next Halloween, be married. In the 18th century Ireland, a matchmaking cook might bury a ring in her mashed potatoes on Halloween night, hoping to bring true love to the diner who found it. In Scotland, fortune tellers recommended that an eligible young woman name a hazelnut for each of her suitors and then toss the nuts into a fireplace. The nut that burned to ashes rather than popping or exploding, the story went, represented the girl's future husband. In some versions of this legend, the opposite was true. The nut that burned away symbolised a love that would not last. Another tale had it that if a young woman ate a sugary concoction made out of walnuts, hazelnuts and nutmeg before bed on Halloween night, she would dream about her future husband. I might have to give that a go. Young women tossed apple peels over their shoulders, hoping that the peels would fall on the floor in the shape of their future husband's initials. Tried to learn about their futures by peering at egg yolks floating in a bowl of water, and stood in front of mirrors in darkened rooms, holding candles and looking over their shoulders for their husbands' faces. Other rituals were more competitive. At some Halloween parties, the first guest to find a burr on a chestnut hunt would be the first to marry. At others, the first successful apple bobber would be the first down the aisle. Of course, whether we're asking for romantic advice or trying to avoid 7 years bad luck, each one of these Halloween superstitions relies on the goodwill of the very same spirits whose presence the early Celts felt so keenly. I just want to dive back into the history of trick-or-treating because it takes a little bit of a sinister turn in this section, and it's Halloween. We have to go sinister, do we not? So for most kids, it wouldn't be Halloween without trick-or-treating. However, that wasn't always the case. When the custom of trick-or-treating started in the 1930s and early 1940s, children were given anything from homemade cookies, pieces of cake, fruit, nuts, and coins, and toys. In the 1950s, candy manufacturers began to get in on the act and promote their products for Halloween. And as trick-or-treating became more and more popular, candy was increasingly regarded as affordable and convenient offering. It wasn't until the 1970s, though, that wrapped factory-made candy was viewed as the only acceptable thing to hand out to all the little ghosts and goblins that showed up on people's doorsteps. A key reason for this was safety, as parents feared that the real-life bogeyman might tamper with goodies that weren't store-bought and sealed. Do you know where I'm going with this? I have covered it in my true crime story time. Today, when it comes to Halloween candy, a number of the most popular brands are enduring classics. For example, the first Hershey's milk chocolate bar was produced in the 1900s, and Hershey's Kisses made their debut in 1907. Company founder Milton Hershey was a pioneer in the mass production of milk chocolate and turned what previously had been a luxury item for the well-to-do in something affordable for the average American. I don't think in the UK we have Hershey's. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brits, but I can't say I've seen it. In the early 1900s, he also built an entire town, Hershey, in Pennsylvania, around his chocolate factory. That's pretty cool. Shows what a profit there is in chocolate. In 1917, Harry Burnett Reese moved to Hershey, where he was employed as a dairyman for the chocolate company and later worked at its factory. Inspired by Milton Hershey's success, Reese, who eventually had 16 children, began making candies in his basement. In the mid-1920s, he built a factory of his own and produced an assortment of candies, including peanut butter cups, which he invented in 1928 and made with Hershey's chocolate. During the World War II, a shortage of ingredients led Reese to pull the plug on his other candies and focus on his most popular product, peanut butter cups. In 1963, Hershey acquired the H.B. Reese Candy Company. In 1923, a struggling Minnesota-born candy maker, Frank Mars, launched the Milky Way bar, which became a bestseller that we do have in the UK. In 1930, he introduced the Snickers bar, reportedly named after his favourite horse, followed in 1932 by the Three Musketeers bar. Frank's son, Forrest, eventually joined the company, only to leave after a falling out with his father. Forrest Mars relocated to England, where he created the Mars bar in the early 1930s. In 1941, he launched M&M's. Mars anticipated that World War II would produce a cocoa shortage, so he partnered with Bruce Murray, son of a Hershey executive, in order to have access to sufficient supply of ingredients. The candy's name stands for Mars and Murray. Another crowd-pleasing Halloween candy, the Kit Kat bar, was first sold in England in 1935 as a Roundtree's chocolate crisp. and in 1937 was rechristened the Kit Kat Chocolate Crisp. That was never going to catch on, guys, was it? The name is said to be derived from a London literary and politician group, the Kit Kat or Kit Kat Club, established in the late 17th century. The group's moniker is thought to be an abbreviation of the name of the man who owned the shop where the group originally gathered. Since 1988, the brand has been owned by Nestlé, a maker of another perennial trick-or-treat favourite, the Nestlé Crunch Bar, which debuted in the late 1930s. And of course, no Halloween would be complete without candy corn, which was invented in the 1880s by George Renninger of the Wandley Candy Company of Philadelphia. Other companies went on to produce their own versions of the tricolour treat, none longer than the Jelly Belly Candy Company, which has been doing so since 1898. Now, moving into the more sinister side. Rumours of tainted, poisoned or otherwise murderous Halloween candy handed out to unsuspecting youngsters are as much a part of the Halloween tradition as costumes and sing-song pleas for sweets. The myth goes like this. No kid is safe on October 31st because psychotic murderers may hand out tainted treats to trick-or-treating children. But is poisoned Halloween candy a terrifying threat or an urban legend? Quote, many, if not most, reports of Halloween sadism are of questionable authenticity, end quote, writes sociologists and criminal justice experts Joel Best and Gerald T. when they conducted an extensive study on so-called Halloween sadism or crimes specifically committed using Halloween treats or customs. They concluded that the threat is greatly exaggerated. Though both parents and kids are taught to be on the alert for tampered with sweets, most of the cases the researchers analysed were either overstated or could not be linked to Halloween itself. Best and Gerald suggest that fears of Halloween sadism rise during fearful times. For example, paranoia about tainted candy spiked in the early 1980s after a rash of Tylenol poisonings in which cyanide laced was placed on store shelves and sold. The high-profile crime led to the introduction that child-proof containers and tough federal laws aimed at punishing those who tamper with drugs. After the Tylenol murders, which are still unsolved, warnings about adulterated Halloween candy increased. While the fears may be overblown, Halloween crimes involving poison have occurred. In 1964, a New York woman named Helen Pfeil was arrested for handing out things like ant poison and dog biscuits to kids. When questioned, the housewife said that she was joking and that she gave the items to kids she felt were too old to be trick-or-treating. Alright, I get it, I'll stop. Though no children were poisoned during the incident, law enforcement didn't find her actions funny. Now, I have covered this in my true crime last year, I believe, but the most infamous Halloween poisoning took place on October 31st, 1974. That's when Texas man named Ronald O'Brien gave cyanide-laced pixie sticks to 5 children, including his son. The other children never ate the candy, but his 8-year-old son Timothy did and died soon after. Though nobody saw O'Brien put the cyanide in the candy, investigators learned that O'Brien had been recently taking life insurance policies out on his children. He was convicted of murder and executed via lethal injection in 1984. I personally think they should have given him a cyanide-laced pixie stick, and he could have writhed in pain like his 8-year-old son did. But I'm going off topic. I get very passionate about my true crime. You know this. If you listen to my true crime, that is. Okay. Though it's been decades since the crime, the Candyman murder still looms large in the memories of many parents on Halloween. O'Brien's attorney told American Statesman in 2009, "As you know, my client was convicted of killing Halloween." I think he pretty much did. I mean, he didn't, but he did, because he started putting the fear into... I mean, if one parent who was not some psychopathic murderer could poison children, what's stopping the next house from doing it? You know? But regardless of how horrific O'Brien's crime, it was no random act of Halloween havoc, since it was aimed directly at his children and their friends, not at trick-or-treaters. Doesn't make it any better though, does it? And I remember talking about this in my true crime. One kid fell asleep with it in his hand because he was obviously tired, but he was going to eat it and then couldn't get into it and fell asleep holding it. That's how close he came to killing another child. Perhaps because of O'Brien's notoriety, parents can still be skittish when it comes to Halloween candy. Hence he killed Halloween. Authorities can be too, despite the fact that rumours of randomly distributed poisoned candy or threats like apples that contain razor blades are nothing more than urban legends. For example, when a 7-year-old California girl collapsed while trick-or-treating on Halloween in 1990, Santa Monica police confiscated the kid's candy. However, her illness was later discovered to be caused by a heart murmur, and when examined, she showed no signs of poisoning. The US doesn't have a monopoly on poisoned candy horror stories. In the 1980s, a crime ring called the Mystery Man with 21 Faces blackmailed Japanese candy companies with threats that it would lace their candy with cyanide if they didn't offer large ransoms. At first, it seemed like just a threat, and stores pulled large amounts of candy from store shelves only to find that it was not poisoned. The blackmailers struck again a few months later. This time, their threats were in earnest. Packs of cookies and candies laced with cyanide were discovered on store shelves in central Japan. Fortunately, nobody died from the poison, though the chief of the Shiga police department eventually killed himself because of his failure to stop the crime ring. Now that's sad. Who committed Japan's candy crimes? We may never know. The perpetrators still haven't been found even after 125,000 investigations by Japanese police. If you're looking for something to fear on All Hallows Eve, you might want to look away from the threat bag and towards the nearest car. Halloween night can be deadly due to DUIs and pedestrian accidents. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, 43% of all Halloween fatalities between 2011 and 2013 involved a drink driver. And there you go. That is both sad, scary, all at the same time. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed diving into a little bit of history of Halloween with me. I thought I would do something a little bit different. I didn't know that the reason the black cat myth is because witches turned into black cats, so I learnt something. As always, please do leave your thoughts and comments down below. I love interacting with you all. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. I would love to have you in my fanatic family and on my diamond painting journey and my journey through life, where I am as random as it gets. I never thought I'd be sitting here diving into the history of Halloween, but I thought I would do something a little bit different because we're now doing spooky flings. Yay! It's here, guys, and we're fast approaching into Halloween. I will be doing some true crime. I can generally get away with the more graphic stuff in the month of October, so look out for those. If you are into true crime, I do have true crime story time on my playlist. Thank you so much for keeping me company. Let me know what you thought. Did you learn anything? Let me know. And I shall see you next week. I almost wanted to sign off like my true crime because it was a little bit true crimey, wasn't it? Love, hugs, and sparkles to you all. Stay safe out there.